Hi again, and good evening. I did spent a little bit of time reviewing some of the videos that I've created so far, and I want to go back and revisit one from a few episodes ago where I spent some time talking about the first semester. And I think it's helpful to spend a little more time talking about the first semester because it's a very critical time. And I don't want to say that in a way that makes you feel more pressure, but something that I've experienced, and I really couldn't fit it into that video because that video was getting long enough. When students are trying to pick a research group, they have a lot of questions. But when I've spoken to new grad students or first year grad students, they don't always know what questions to ask. Um, they're curious about things, and often I think their curiosity is questions along the lines of "Tell me about your research," and or it ends up being questions that really kind of miss the mark. And part of the reason I say this is so my experience was when I went into the PhD program in chemistry, I sat down with each professor, and I think every student did. And I had sort of like five or six questions that I knew I wanted to ask. And after I sat down with this one professor, the professor I ended up working for actually, he commented to me that my questions were different than what everybody else was asking. And he really appreciated the questions I asked. And it kind of made me wonder, like, what is everybody else asking? And I didn't ask him that question. I haven't asked other people what questions they ask, but it made me aware ever since then that students don't always know what questions to ask, or they might be afraid to ask, or they might be thinking about something else when they maybe even feeling a little intimidated sitting down with a professor and having a conversation. And one thing, like, I'll just kind of, I like to bring this story up because it's sort of a funny story. Is I went on a campus visit before making my decision, and I didn't really have much time to prepare, but like I was supposed to meet with five or six different faculty. And I remember one faculty member who was the department chair at the time kind of made this comment to me like, "Why are you meeting with me?" And I'm thinking the same thing, like, why are we having a meeting? Like, I didn't put him on my calendar. But we ended up having a really good conversation. And he was the person who told me that when you're trying to pick a school, you need to pick a school where you see that there's multiple faculty you could see yourself working for. Don't go to a university because of one professor, but make sure that there's several people there that you would be willing to work for because circumstances may dictate you don't get to work for your first choice. And that advice stuck with me, and I've told that advice to many other students over the years. But there was one faculty member that um, I had heard about from other people, and nothing negative, but I just didn't know like what to expect from this faculty member. It was just I had heard his name brought up before, and so when I sat down with him, he had just gotten back from a conference, and so we like started 5 minutes late. He literally had just gotten back, and I was going to meet. I think I had actually spent time meeting with his students because he wasn't there, and they took me to his office because he had shown up. And I sat down in his office, and I'm thinking, like, I don't know what I'm going to say to him, and it probably was a little bit of intimidation. And I saw a statue on his bookshelf, and I saw like a photograph too, and I remarked something about one or the other. I wish I could remember what. And because I recognized it, and I think if it was a, who it was a picture of, I don't remember, but I asked the right question because he's told me that he was a history buff and he was into all, like, when the part of history he enjoys is reading about generals in history. And so he started telling me like about different generals during World War II and generals actually going way back in history. And the next thing I knew, like our half hour of time was over. And we didn't really even discuss anything about chemistry. But I was able to actually have a conversation with him. Like he knew a lot more than I did, but I simply asked questions. And the thing that I learned from that is, and this is very valuable information, is sometimes if you ask the right question of a professor, they'll just talk and they'll open up to you. And so it's just figuring out what questions to ask. And I had a classmate in a class who he had kind of picked up on this too. And I remember one time, like, I don't remember what we were supposed to do in class that day, but it was the same professor. And so this is months later. And this friend of mine said, if we just start asking him questions, he'll just start talking, and then we don't have to worry about learning anything new today. We can maybe push back our exam. And so, and basically the same professor, he was a big football fan. And so when he walked in, this friend of mine asked him, "Oh, what did you think of the game yesterday?" And thinking that, oh, we're going to waste a half hour of class here talking about yesterday's football game because the professor's favorite team had gotten like killed or like lost really badly. Well, it kind of backfired. He basically didn't want to talk about it. So we ended up having class. But so I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's valuable to do a little bit of homework or do a little bit of prep when you go in to talk with a faculty member, whether it's on a campus visit or if it's during that first semester when you're trying to figure out, like, do I really want to work for this person? And will I get along with them? And what is their personality like? And so I got a few notes written down here I'm going to look at, put with my reading glasses from time to time. But, really when I would talk with faculty, I would kind of ask the question of like, what are your expectations? If I join your group, what do you expect me to accomplish? And what do you expect me, what kind of hours do you expect me to work? And so there's a couple, there's follow-up questions that can come from that. Like, how many papers do you expect your students to write? A lot of times departments will have stipulations that you have to write 3 papers before graduation. Sometimes you have to have a paper out before your qualifying exam. Some faculty, they expect you to write 5 papers. It's good to find out up front, like, how much writing do you expect me to do? Whether that's as a first author or just as an author who contributes to a paper. It's also good to know, like, do you expect me to work 9 to 5 or 8 to 5? Or what kind of hours do you work? I did a postdoc, and my advisor during that time, she expected everybody to come in on Saturdays because that was the time she was available to have a weekly meeting with each of us individually. During grad school, I didn't have to go in on Saturdays. I know groups where people go in 7 days a week, or if you're in a group where you're working with animals, you may have to watch the clock and go in accordingly at different times of day, different times of the week in order to take care of animals in your lab. Or if you're working with cell lines or some kind of biological sample, you are on the clock and you may have to go in at weird hours or any day of the week to do some kind of prep work or maintenance of those. So that's part of, even talking with the group is finding out, like, what kind of schedule do you work? Because if you're not a morning person and the group shows up at 8 o'clock, that might be a little bit of a conflict with you. Now, truth be told, I've seen a lot of grad students roll onto campus around 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. There aren't that many early birds, but it's good to know because some faculty will email you in the middle of the night or come in at 7 or have expectations about when they want to see you in the lab. For me, I was fortunate enough to work for someone who in grad school, like he allowed us to have work our schedules. And what was important to him was that we gave him weekly updates on how we were doing. And we had presentations to give in our weekly group meetings. And as long as we were taking care of business, he didn't really care what hours we were working. And that worked well for our group. But I know other groups where, you know, there wasn't quite that flexibility, or maybe they worked longer hours. So it's important to ask those kinds of questions like, what are your expectations? What do you foresee as far as how many papers I can do? Do you anticipate sending me to conferences, or how often would you send me to conferences? Ask those kinds of questions. Another good question to ask is, are you planning to take any students? If they say no, well, then like, I'm not going to put this person down as one of my options. So it's important to have that conversation, like, or ask, do you have research funding to take students? That's another way to ask the same question, because like, I think I said this in another video, like I was on a teaching assistantship for 5 semesters because my advisor was taking students, but he had limited funding. So because he was a new professor and had a small group, he was allowed to take students, but then a department had to put us all on a teaching assistantship. And it wasn't until my 3rd year that I was able to get on a research assistantship. So that, I feel like that worked out for me, but I think there's plenty of people who would see that as a red flag and probably say like, I don't want to teach, or I hate teaching, or like, I don't want to, I want to focus on research instead of teaching. So it's important to realize like, how am I going to be funded, and can you even take students? You may also want to ask, will I be reporting to you, or who will I be reporting to on a day-to-day basis? Because it might be a senior student in the lab, it might be a postdoc or a staff member. Some faculty do so much travel, or they're so busy with other obligations that you don't see them that often. At a smaller school, or sometimes with junior faculty, they have a lot of availability and they may even spend time working in the lab. But then once the professor gets tenure or becomes more popular and busier, it's going to be harder to get time with them. And so you can kind of have that conversation, like, how much will I see you? How much will I interact? Will we meet once a week? Will we meet once a day? Like, like what kind of schedule should we keep? And if I run into problems in the lab, like, who should I look to as a resource if you're not available? And so understanding the hierarchy in the lab is important. You can also ask questions such as, the history of the group. How long does it typically take one of your students to reach their PhD? Do they get it in 5 years? Does it usually take 6? I think most students ask a question along those lines, but it's good to know, like, okay, am I going to get out of here in 5 years? Or, maybe the nature of the work, it's going to take me 6 or more than 6 years to get the work done. That's good to ask, good to be aware of. Another question you can ask is, where are your former students now? Are they teaching or in industry, or where did they land? And this is a question I did not ask as a student, but what I've come to learn is some research groups are well known because all of their students end up going into academia. And then there's other groups where none of those students end up in academia. And I think sometimes that has to do with the research, or maybe it has something to do with something else. I can't tell you for certain. But if you are interested in becoming a teacher, then it may make sense for you to join a group where the faculty member knows how to help you in that regard or has a history of having students get into teaching. Because sometimes faculty are a great resource for, giving you advice and preparing you for a career in teaching, and other faculty, don't enjoy teaching, and it's something that it's a necessary evil part of their job. And if you want advice on teaching, their advice is going to be, I want you in the lab. They're not going to be encouraging you to teach. They're going to be encouraging you to be in the lab. So it's important to recognize that, if you want mentoring from this faculty member, what can they mentor you in? And maybe even as you interview faculty, you might realize, I enjoy teaching, like I want to work for Professor A, but Professor B would be a good mentor for teaching. And it's good to seek out mentors outside of your research group. It's good to find friends outside of your research group, people you can turn to, aside from just the people you see every day at work in your lab. Um, and I kind of have answered or discussed everything that I've written down, but it is good to really focus on asking the faculty member what their expectations are of you or of people in their group. And it's also good for you to ask yourself sort of a similar question, like, what are your expectations of yourself or the grad school experience? Because if you're thinking, I want to publish 10 papers, and you're working for a group where that's probably not going to be possible because the projects are long and arduous, then you have to decide, like, what's more important, my priority or this research group. And there's a lot of people who don't like or aren't so obsessed about how many papers they write. But then, are you interested in, do you want to teach? Do you want to go into industry? What do you want to do after grad school? Because you should be thinking about that when you're picking a research group. Now, something that I'll bring up here is because this seems to be a question that students will ask. What if it turns out I don't like the person I start to work with? Well, that's, a tough question, and it happens once in a while where somebody joins a group and they have second thoughts. And that's a dangerous place to find yourself. And I think, like, if you would talk to other faculty or talk to staff, they're going to really encourage you to try and make it work. Because if you were to break it off with that faculty member, that sets you back in getting your degree and in getting your research accomplished, but it also puts the faculty member in a tough situation. And when I've seen this happen, it usually happens, about somewhere during the second year where somebody has doubts about who they're working for. And I mean, and it isn't uncommon for students to kind of question, and maybe it's they don't enjoy the research as much as they thought, or maybe there's some kind of conflict within the group, and they just think that it'd be better off if they join a different group. And so typically what people are going to say to you is try and make it work. Now, that's typically not what you want to hear in that situation, but as I already just said, like, you're in a difficult situation, and if you end up leaving the group, that doesn't mean that somebody else is going to take you into their group. And depending on how it happens or when it happens, you may be competing with a new batch of first-year students who are also trying to get into groups. And so I've seen it happen where a student, at the end of the school year, typically, somewhere between first and second year or early in the second year, they decide, I can't make this work. I need to leave this group. I want to join somebody else. And basically all the faculty will say, well, we're interviewing the new students. We're not going to, nobody's going to take you because there's 20 other students here that we're interested in, and they have priority right now. So that can be a really dangerous situation. And I bring this up because, not again to scare you or to give you anxiety, but it's to saying that yes, occasionally it happens where somebody is unhappy or they end up in a situation where it doesn't work out and they have to find a different group. But it's not easy. And it usually takes time to make the switch to another group. And if you make that jump, you're probably going to put yourself back at least a year in the program, because whatever research you accomplished isn't going to necessarily transfer over to the new faculty. And so you're probably going to be put on a new project and you're basically starting over. But also, that's why it's important to be asking the right questions the first time around. So that way you have all the information you need and you can make a good decision. And I think part of it too is recognizing faculty that, like, oh wow, I could not work for this professor because personality conflict would be a problem, or I would not get along with that group of people, or I'm not interested in research. And so when you have those doubts or concerns farther down the road, you might tell yourself that, hey, I looked at the other options and the other options weren't going to work for me, so I need to make this option work. And I think most grad students do have those moments during grad school where they wonder if they made the right choice. And so that's really the point I'm trying to make, is you want to make sure you are making a good choice, or a choice that you're happy with. And that's why you want to take the rotation process seriously. You want to ask the right questions. You want to invest the time, so that way, if further down the road you have some doubts, you can reflect on what you learned during that first semester, and then you can remind yourself why you made the decision you made. And, and if you realize that, what, like, I've got more information now and I wish I would have had it and I would have decided differently, well, then you move forward with that and you see where it goes. But if you just have doubts or concerns and upon reflection you realize, it's not as bad as I thought it was, then I think that will help you to move forward as well. So I hope that this is all good food for thought, especially for those of you in your first few weeks or first semester of grad school, and as you're trying to sort out, like, who should I work for? Who can I work for? What am I doing? How do I know? Again, just do a little bit of planning. Make sure you ask serious questions, consequential questions that will help you to reflect on, not just, will I get along with these people and I fit in, but is this good for me both in the short and the long term? And I think by asking the questions I already outlined, I think that'll help you to make a good decision as far as, like, where your fit is or where your fit is not. And so again, I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to chatting, giving you some more advice in the near future. And again, if you enjoy these videos, please tell your friends, and don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button. So for tonight, good night. See you soon. Bye.